This is the emblem of the Alliance for Global Unity. They call themselves the Circle.
A circle, huh? Well, what gives them the right to mess up our station?
Before we can break down the successfully failed Bajoran coup attempted by the extremist group known as the Alliance for Global Unity, or the Circle in Latin, we need to analyze the Bajoran history and resulting political infrastructure that came after.
What is this, some kind of ship?
Huh? According to legend, the ancient Bajorans used ships like these to explore their star system 800 years ago.
You mean it when humans were first sailing across the oceans? Bajorans were already going to other planets?
Some scholars say they made it all the way to Cardassia.
Bajor was one of the earliest advanced races, having discovered faster-than-light travel before most other civilizations. The citizenry of Bajor was also relatively peaceful, accepting of other races that they came into contact with and bringing them things such as architecture and art. This would ultimately prove detrimental when the Bajorans engaged in first contact with the Cardassian Union. The Cardassians quickly moved to occupy Bajor and strip the planet of its resources. Given the peaceful nature of the Bajorans, the takeover would occur with relatively no resistance. For the next 50 years, Bajorans would learn violence and conduct terrorist attacks across the Bajoran and Cardassian sector. All of this in an attempt to free their people. Arguably, with Federation political pressure, the Cardassians would withdraw from the Bajoran sector, and we have the formation of the Bajoran Provisional Government.
Ruling parties are at each other's throats. Factions that were united against the Cardassians have resumed old conflicts.
After its formation, the Provisional Government would move quickly to request Federation assistance as well as oversight. There are multiple reasons for this, but the main one being that once the Cardassians were gone, the varying Bajoran factions that all had a common enemy would slowly begin turning on each other. It would seem that fighting was easy. Governing is harder.
I was just talking with our good neighbor, Quark. He's laying odds that the government's going to fall.
Quark knows a good bet when he hears one. This government will be gone in a week, and so will you.
What happens to Bajor then?
Civil war.
The Provisional Government found itself constantly under siege as rebuilding infrastructure and bringing order to chaos feels nigh impossible. If not for Starfleet assistance, as well as the deep faith of the people, many believe civil war would have immediately engulfed the populace. Thankfully, this wasn't the case. Though for a long time, differing political organizations would vie for power. Most all of them kept under control thanks to the religious stranglehold that continually pushed for peace. Hey guys, so some of you have come back and told me you hated the ads for Raid Shadow Legends. Well, generally it was mostly new people, but you get what I'm saying. First off, I really do like Raid Shadow Legends. I wouldn't show them if I didn't. But let me go ahead and level with you. Revenue during this time of year is low, and even someone with near 100,000 subscribers doesn't really make as much money as you think they do. So around of this time of year, I have to make ends meet. That said, if you really don't want me to do paid sponsorships, especially 3 minutes of worth after the first minute has gone by, then consider becoming a patron. If we can get the Patreon to $2,500, I won't be accepting any more paid sponsorships. If we get it to $4,000, I'll turn ads off completely. Though you might still get them due to Paramount, I can't control that they steal my money. And there it is. If you want to help me, you want to see the channel thrive, you want to never see another paid sponsorship, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/lorereloaded. With that out of the way, let's get back into it.
So, you're involved with the Circle.
I am the Circle, Major.
While there wouldn't be many successful attempts, what's striking about the one nearly successful overthrow of the Bajoran Provisional Government is how the organization was empowered in one way or another by literally everyone. They would be enfranchised by the members within the extremist group itself that worked tirelessly to get their goals done. The populace that would listen to them and often not question the more damaging ideals. The opposition that wouldn't take them seriously, and even Starfleet in its stupefying indifference. All of these people, all of these organizations either strengthened the argument of the terrorists or failed to address them. This allowed many to move unopposed. In fact, let's look at the genesis of the power grab by the Alliance of Global Unity. With the quote-unquote death of the Kai, or her choosing not to return at a minimum, and the Kai, think religious hope of the Bajoran people, we would see the fracturing of Bajor accelerate. Riots in the street, political factions turning on each other to gain power, and no strong leader that people would look up to tell them that everyone just needs to calm down. There was a chorus of voices on how to fix all of the ills of the modern day, but no real fixes being instituted. Sure, a glimmer of hope for the Bajoran people seemed to arrive in the form of Nationalists, a well-known hero of the occupation that had escaped a Cardassian slave camp and returned, but it was far from a conclusion that he would do any good. And ultimately, his inaction early on would mean that the Circle would prevail, at least for a time.
I'm Minister Jaroesa, and I can't tell you how delighted I am to welcome you home.
Believe me, it is a pleasure to be here.
Would you mind if I address the crowd? You can't expect a politician to give up an opportunity like this.
You go right ahead.
Thank you. Fellow Bajorans, I have only one thing to say to you, to ask you, really. Never forget this moment, because I promise you that one day your children and your grandchildren will ask you what it was like the day Nationalists returned to Bajor.
In fact, arguably, factions used his return to gain more prominence. Politicians and influencers from all over Bajor would declare the love and victories of the return of the Bajoran war hero and how he was brought to them. These people would talk about how this was a sign and everyone would need to come together and how Ideal X was the best way to go. This seemingly also inspired Bajoran nationalists to push for independence even harder. Attacks on non-Bajorans increased. Those without nose ridges would be more and more isolated, including even children. What started as a trickle of bigotry started to become commonplace. With civil unrest on the rise, the government responded by reassigning Bajoran military officers. Politicians would come out and be more active, stating things would be under control and everything was all right, and many claimed that the violence was natural, commonplace. This was just the growing pains of a people that were relearning what it was to be free. These same politicians failing to mention how their colleagues, who were on the opposing side, were being beaten on the streets. Ironically, there was a creation of a class for even those who were in politics, where belief in only certain policies would mean safety. There would be more and more weapons on the streets, and Bajor would feel as unsafe as it was when the Cardassians were in charge. This would create fear and also anger. The anger that people had would be put squarely on the shoulders of the Bajoran provincial government and Starfleet. After all, why aren't they moving to stop all of it? If the Alliance for Global Unity was wrong, how come people were being hurt every day and no justice was being done? Even the station commander's own quarters weren't safe as it was graffitied. A relatively high security area could be reached by the Circle. Hell, well-known Bajorans were being kidnapped in daylight at monasteries. Turning to the Circle almost seemed reasonable, as they appeared to be getting weapons to help save the citizenry. And we'll talk about those weapons a bit later, don't worry.
You mean because of this Circle business? They're just a bunch of hooligans who use violence to get attention.
There are so many issues, so many red flags and warning signs, and yet no one noticed what was going on. Everyone on the inside of this bubble was so caught up in their specific part of it, they seemingly missed the forest for the trees. At least until it was too late. After careful manipulations, the extremist group had garnered so much credit, prestige, and legitimacy that the Bajoran provincial government agreed to a transition of power, and Starfleet honored its commitment to the will of the people and pulled out of the Bajoran sector. The Starfleet forces stationed on Deep Space Nine were ordered to evacuate before the Bajoran militia arrived. It's ironic. The Alliance for Global Unity was doing this for Bajor, to protect all Bajorans. However, as the transition of power occurred, Bajorans would want to run, to flee Deep Space Nine and other provinces. They were scared of the violence this new regime was bringing, the Force. These people claimed to be the Peacebringers. They were there to establish order, and yet they were doing it with violence and secrecy. When the Alliance boarded Deep Space Nine, they were met with no outward resistance, though rogue Starfleet assets continually sabotaged the station, and a small rebellion of the regime's rule fought against them on the station as they attempted to buy time to show that the Circle was being manipulated, which is kind of stupid. Starfleet assets could have let the station be taken and found other ways to get to Bajor to stop the proceedings. I know they state there weren't many options, but this just isn't true. Arguably, if the runabouts could withstand attacks from other Bajoran ships, then even having civilians on board wouldn't be as much of a problem. But I've discussed that in other videos, and let's take a look at another piece of this puzzle.
Begin transport.
I think you'll find everything's in order.
Very well. If you'll sign off on the shipment, we'll be on our way.
For those who have seen the 3 episodes from which all of this is being derived, you are likely wondering why I'm not talking about one of the major plot points that comes up, that is to say, the Cardassian involvement. For those who need a reminder, the Circle was getting its weapons via various traders. However, these traders were a proxy for the Cardassian Union. The Cardassian government was empowering the extremists, aiding them through military might and possibly also indirectly through propaganda and funding. This all being done without the knowledge or understanding of most military officers and even some politicians. The Cardassian link spelled the end of the Alliance for Global Unity after it was exposed. This due to the fear that Cardassians would return and be able to once again claim Bajor due to Starfleet's withdrawal. Though, to be fair, those at the highest echelons were aware of this and attempted to stop anyone who would expose them. However, here's the problem with the defeat of the extremists. While the Cardassians were backing the Circle's policies, well, they weren't exactly all wrong. You see, everyone in this situation is right, and everyone in this situation is wrong. In the entire affair, there is no clear-cut answer. That's what makes it messy. The Circle is right that Bajorans actually do have the right to preside over their own affairs. They brought art and science to worlds across the sector at the start of their space exploration. They just wanted peace and didn't deserve the death and enslavement that they received for their trouble. They shouldn't have to hide behind a larger power to simply survive. They deserve better than that. But the Provisional government is right as well. It's all nice and good to stand on your own, but all that sentiment goes flying out the window when Cardassian warships start showing up. You really can't say Bajor for Bajorans when you're being enslaved by the very people that you drove off. Starfleet is a necessary evil and is the best of this worst-case scenario. The Federation wants Bajor to become a part of their own organization, sure, but ultimately, Bajor is allowed to stand on its own. The attempts to assist the Bajorans is ultimately, for lack of a better word, a humanitarian mission by the Federation. The Circle's methods could be justified as well. For half of a century, Bajorans committed violence, terrible acts of violence to get their people's freedom. So the Circle's actions of terrorism, even if you assumed it was official policy of the group, might be considered reasonable for them to throw off the shackles of their oppressors. These people had done it for so long that this was just Bajoran politics in action. So in theory, the Circle might not be considered that bad. It was just the next natural step to autonomy. In the end, the near-Bajoran Civil War and successful failure of a coup is an interesting look at the dynamics and instability of Bajor in the early days of its freedom. I would even argue it's reflective of current trends we've found in the Western world. The people wanted to self-govern but had no idea how to attain that goal. The 3-part Deep Space Nine episodes, specifically The Homecoming, The Circle, and The Siege, are worth your time to rewatch and consider how all of this could happen. I would suggest definitely checking them out and then letting me know your thoughts. Do you agree or disagree? Don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Lore Reloaded.